Chairman. Our order in front of us instructs us that our first speaker this morning will be Mr. Aaron Siri.
Thank you for being here, Mr. Siri. We look forward to your presentation. Mr. Siri, I did have one question. The committee here may have some questions for you about your presentation. Would it be your desire that we stop you along the way to ask questions, or would you prefer to wait to the end of your presentation and then ask questions? Either way is fine with us.
I'm happy to do it either way as well. If there's a burning question, I'm very happy to answer it in the middle.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, great. Thank you, and good morning, and thank you for holding this. I think it's incredibly important. There's obviously the pharmaceutical companies have billions of dollars every year to promote their product, and their, COVID-19 vaccines, other vaccines are products. Car companies that sell cars want to promote their products and do a great job doing it, and the federal health authorities get billions of dollars of taxpayer money every year to also promote the products. And so having an opportunity to actually hear a bit about those who aren't in the business of promoting these products is a wonderful thing, and I commend you all for actually taking a whole day to do that, at least the portion of this presentation that I'll be presenting at. So I was asked to speak about COVID-19 vaccines specifically, and in particular, how could the system be so broken? So many folks are looking over the last few years at COVID-19 vaccines and have a hard time squaring what they understood about vaccines and then what they learned about COVID-19 vaccines. What do you mean it doesn't stop transmission? I thought vaccines stop transmission. Well, what do you mean we can't sue for injury? So forth and so on. And I think to understand COVID-19 vaccines, we need to how vaccines are treated in the United States, and I'm going to go through that in my presentation. I'll just start with who I am. I'm an attorney, and my firm has over 60 folks in it. About 40 of them do pretty much exclusively vaccine work. About 30 of them only vaccine work. We have I believe, the largest vaccine practice in the world that doesn't represent pharmaceutical companies. And including, we have a vaccine injury practice, about 10 folks, a vaccine exemption practice, and a vaccine policy practice. We did cases, for example, we got an injunction against the United States Air Force from kicking out over 10,000 members of the Air Force who the Air Force wanted to exclude because they filed for religious exemptions to the COVID-19 vaccine that the Air Force was just denying and wrote without actually honoring their First Amendment right to religious freedom. We got the FDA to produce the Pfizer documents they relied upon to license the COVID-19 vaccine that they wanted to make the public wait at least 75 years. We recently brought a lawsuit in Mississippi where we got a court there to restore the religious exemption for the first time since 1979. We were one of the firms that filed challenging the OSHA mandate up to the Supreme Court, along with a bunch of others. I didn't get selected as one of the attorneys to argue it. Unfortunately, I wish I was. And we've done a host of other. We've got over 1,000 FOIA requests with FDA, NIH, CDC. We sue them regularly. They love us. We also do a whole host of other vaccine-related work. So. Here's the critical thing you need to know about vaccines, okay? And this is, I couldn't overstate this, all right? In the early 1980s, there were only 3 routine vaccines in the United States: DTP, MMR, and OPV, 2 injected, 1 oral. The amount of liability from the injuries those products were causing resulted in all the manufacturers go out of business or stop producing the vaccines except for 1 for each of those 3 vaccines. Instead of letting them make a better and safer product, and that's the vaccine schedule from the early 80s, it's right up there. There's 17 vaccines now on the schedule, multiple doses. Instead of making them make a better product, a safer product, like we do with drugs, or airplanes, or cars, or every other consumer product out there. Instead, Congress passed, in its wisdom, the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act of 1986. And what this did is it gave immunity, effectively immunity, complete immunity effectively to pharmaceutical companies for the injuries caused by their vaccine products. Not only for the 3 vaccines at that time, but for any childhood vaccine that they created henceforth. And that started effectively the gold rush, so to speak, where the schedule went from just those 3 routine shots to what you have today. There are 17 vaccines now on the childhood vaccine schedule, the CDC's. I'm going to go back just one slide. And, this is a U.S. Supreme Court decision at the top. It says the remaining manufacturer of DTP estimated that its potential tort liability exceeded its annual sales by a factor of 200. That's the level of harm that was being caused by those products in the early 80s that resulted in this immunity. Okay, and to just really drive this home, there is no other consumer product that has this type of immunity. The product we say is safe, you can't sue the manufacturer for harm. It's disjointing at the least. Okay, what did that do? Okay. What it did was it eliminated the way we assure product safety in America, period. The cars, every product around you for the most part is safer because companies don't want to lose money. They have an incentive when they make a product to make money. And if they think they'll lose money, they're not going to make it. It's what drives safety for most products. You could see there's another way you assure product safety, and I put it in very small letters on purpose. It's regulators. They have a job for sure. But in this instance, typically it's a far, far smaller role. Let's look at the impact. One example of the impact, a critical impact of giving immunity to pharmaceutical companies, okay? And that is an impact on clinical trials. It has disincentivized pharmaceutical companies from doing real proper safety trials on the front end, okay? Let me just, before I show you that, for vaccines, before I show you that, I'm just going to talk for a second about why clinical trials are so important. The reason they're so important is that after you license a product, it is considered unethical to do a placebo-controlled clinical trial, meaning comparing the experimental product with a group of people that get a placebo, an inert substance. That comparison, that statistical comparison, is the way that we evaluate product safety before it goes into the arms or in the bodies of millions of Americans. That's how we do it. We do a clinical trial. So doing a clinical trial before you put a product in the market is so important. Here are the top 5 selling drugs from Pfizer of all time, according to some website. Okay? If you look at this list, 4 of these are drugs. 1 of them is a vaccine. The first 2 and the last 2 are drugs. In the clinical trial relied upon to license those drugs, they had a placebo control group. And look how long the safety review period was. Years. There's one that's different. Prevnar 13, right in the middle, PCV 13. That one only had 6 months of safety review, which, by the way, for a vaccine clinical trial is very long. And the control used was another vaccine, Prevnar 7. And Prevnar 7, as we'll see later, was licensed in a clinical trial not against a placebo, but against another experimental vaccine. Let's compare that to childhood vaccines. These are the vaccines given in the first 6 months of life. Each of these are given 3 times, typically at 2, 4, and 6 months of age, except for Hep B, which is given on day 1, then 2 months, then 6 months. Look at the safety review periods, typically days or weeks, and none of them had a placebo control group. And that's true of virtually every single childhood vaccine. I'm not showing you this to create issues with childhood vaccines, but to help understand the paradigm into which COVID-19 vaccines fell into. People are outraged at the clinical trial of the COVID-19 vaccines, but they have to understand what business as usual was for vaccines to understand the what happened with the COVID-19 vaccine. Those numbers might seem outrageous, so let me show you the FDA's website. So here's the vaccine schedule from the CDC website. The first one is the Hep B vaccine. Here's the package insert for the hepatitis B vaccine. If you open the package insert for every single product, you know those little piece of paper in every drug, and that big piece of paper you open, you go to section 6.1. Under the relevant regulations, the clinical trial relied upon to license that product needs to be summarized in section 6.1. If you look right here on the screen, you could see the section 6.1 of Recombivax HB, which is one of only 2 vaccines given to babies on the first day of life. And I'll read you the relevant language. In 3 clinical studies, 434 doses of Recombivax HB, which, by the way, is a DNA vaccine, 5 micrograms were administered to 147 healthy infants and children up to 10 years of age who were monitored for 5 days after each dose. That is what the FDA relied upon to license this product for babies before it was given to millions of children in America. If I was going to come up with the most nefarious, crazy thing I could come up with to say about vaccines, I frankly would never have thought to say that because it does seem crazy. But there it is. This is on the FDA website. You can go there yourself. Right there at the top, you can see the FDA domain. You can pull up the package insert or go get one of the products and pull out the piece of paper. In fact, it seems so incredible. We FOIA'd the FDA on behalf of our client, the Informed Consent Action Network, and we have the actual clinical trial reports. I have a link for it over there as well. It's you can see right there, Hep B clinical trial reports. You can read the entire report yourself, submitted by Merck to the FDA to license this product. It's 5 days. In fact, you can even open the bottom link as well, which is a formal petition we have filed with the FDA on behalf of ICANN, saying, hey, your job is to only license products that are shown to be safe and effective in a clinical trial. I don't know what exactly the proper time period is for review. I can't tell you, what is the right number of children so it's properly powered. But 147 for 5 days? No, that definitely does not cut it. They had 6 months to respond to that petition. They have now well over a year and have not been able to provide a single shred of proof to substantiate that, in fact, this product was properly licensed, in our view.
Mr. Siri, what year was that rolled out?
It was licensed in the late 80s. Yes.
Okay.
It was the first recombinant Hep B vaccine. So I had the opportunity to depose the world's leading vaccinologist, Dr. Stanley Plotkin. On the left is the standard medical textbooks on vaccines called Plotkin's Vaccines. You can see that right there. It's a nice big book. You can read it. You can also use it as a weapon. It is that big. And in deposing Dr. Plotkin, I asked him about the clinical trial for this product. So you could hear from him. There's a little intro that tells you a little bit about him, and then you'll see me asking him questions about this product. And I try to bring home the point of how clinical trials are important and how important it is to do a proper clinical trial before licensure. I'll just play it.
It is my great honor to use the Stanley Plotkin gavel to open this meeting.
Our good friend and colleague, Dr. Stan Plotkin.
Dr. Plotkin, virtually every country in the world is affected by his vaccines.
He was involved in pivotal trials on anthrax, oral polio, rabies vaccine.
Rubella vaccine, the rotavirus vaccine, rabies.
He has earned the Distinguished Physician Award of the Pediatric Infectious Disease Society, the Finland Award of the National Foundation for Infectious Diseases, the Hilleman Award of the American Society for Microbiology, the French Legion of Honor, and the Bruce Medal in Preventive Medicine.
He's a member of the Institute of Medicine and the French Academy of Medicine.
One of the very special things about him is the global impact that he's had, not just from the products, but from his book.
He developed the standard textbook for vaccines in 1988.
Bill Gates calls his book a Bible for vaccinologists.
I hope you all have indeed read the book, and I hope it's more accurate than the Bible.
He trained just a generation of scientists, including myself, to think like he thinks.
Dr. Plotkin, earlier you testified that there are 2 Hep B vaccines in the market, one by Glaxo, GSK, that's Engerix-B, and the other one is by Merck, Recombivax HB, right?
Yes.
This is the product, the manufacturer insert for Recombivax HB, correct?
Yes.
And the clinical trial experience would be found in section 6.1, correct? Correct? Dr. Plotkin?
Yes.
Okay. In section 6.1, when you look at the clinical trials that were done pre-licensure for Recombivax HB, how long does it say that safety was monitored after each dose?
Let's see. Uh, 5 days.
Is 5 days long enough to detect an autoimmune issue that arises after 5 days?
No.
Is 5 days long enough to detect any neurological disorder that arose from the vaccine after 5 days?
No.
There is no control group, correct?
It does not mention any control group, no.
No. If you turn to section 6.2, under immune system disorders, does it say that there were reports of hypersensitive reactions, including anaphylactoid reactions, bronchospasms, and urticaria having been reported within the first few hours after vaccination?
Yes.
Have there been reports of hypersensitivity syndrome?
Yes, that's what it states.
Reports of arthritis?
It is mentioned.
Okay. It also reports autoimmune diseases, including systemic lupus, erythematosus, lupus-like syndrome, vasculitis, and polyarteritis nodosa as well, correct?
Yes, that's what it states.
And also it states that under the nervous system disorders, it states that after there have been reports of Guillain-Barré syndrome, correct?
Yes.
As well as multiple sclerosis, exacerbation of multiple sclerosis, myelitis, including transverse myelitis, seizure, febrile seizure, peripheral neuropathy, including Bell's palsy, radiculopathy.
Radiculopathy.
Thank you very much. Muscle weakness, hypothesia, and encephalitis, correct?
Correct.
These are events that are reported after vaccination, and as we've just discussed, in order to establish whether it's causal between the vaccine and the condition, you need a randomized, placebo-controlled study. But
yes.
That was not done for this hepatitis B vaccine before licensure, was it?
No.
Okay. And given that the vaccine now appears on the CDC's recommended list, isn't it true that it would now be considered unethical to conduct such a study today?
It would be, yes, it would be ethically difficult.
Mr. Chairman.
When it comes,
Okay.
So my question is, these negative consequences related to this vaccine, were these detected in the 5-day review, or is this something that came afterwards? Because I thought you said there was no control group, or...
It was after.
Yeah, so these 100...
That's in section 6.2.
Was this 147 or patient study, or was this some different one?
Right. So the list of that I read, that's in section 6.2 of the package insert, which is the post-marketing experience. And under the relevant federal regulations, I know folks think, oh yeah, that they just list everything post-marketing, right, to protect themselves from liability. They don't have liability. They don't need to be so worried about listing everything. But the relevant regulations provide that they're only supposed to list adverse events that they detect after licensure that they believe they have some basis to believe is causally related. Not correlation, causally related. I could show you the relevant regulations in one of my later slides. But yes, that's not from the clinical trial. Those things I listed were post-licensure. With 147 children with no control and 5 days of safety review, you're not going to detect virtually anything. It's not powered enough to.
Yeah, what I'm asking is, were these conditions that later appeared in the 147 children?
No,
Or is
sir.
this just conditions that have later appeared in other people who have taken the vaccine?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Going back to this chart, so just going back here for a second. When Pfizer does the clinical trial for the drugs it puts on the market, it wants to know what harms they cause before they go on the market because it's liable for them. It wants to know the safety profile. That's why you have years of clinical trials that last years with a placebo control. Because if it goes on the market and it causes lots of harms, and those products are given often to folks who are not well, so already a sick population, a narrow population, with vaccine, and they still want to know. But with vaccines that are given to healthy, typically babies, millions of them, typically routinely, they have the opposite incentive to their shareholders. If they know about a safety issue, that prevents licensure. It's just basic market forces. I'm not saying that it's a nefarious thing. They're just doing what they're supposed to do as a company. And that's the way the market force has been set up. And you can see that play out in the clinical trials. Skipping forward, just looking at one more. So on that list, you might recall Prevnar 13 had a safety review period of 6 months. Well, the top box is the clinical trial, is part of section 6.1 from Prevnar 13. And in that clinical trial, that actually looked for 6 months instead of a few days or weeks, as they often do. It found that serious adverse events were reported following vaccination in infants and toddlers occurred in 8.2% among Prevnar 13 recipients and 7.2% amongst Prevnar recipients. So 8.2% of kids, healthy kids, within 6 months of getting Prevnar 13 had a serious adverse event. And I put the link up there, right there. You can look it up. To the FDA's definition of serious adverse event, it is something very, very serious. 7.2% of the Prevnar 7 recipients had a serious adverse event, healthy kids within 6 months. Since the rates were similar, from the standard perspective of FDA, that's safe. I mean, from the perspective of a parent, maybe not. But from the perspective of the FDA licensure process, if the rates are similar. So you might be saying, well, maybe they really knew that Prevnar 7 was safe because that was licensed based on placebo control. If you look at the box below, that is the link to the Prevnar 7 package insert. And Prevnar 7, as I noted earlier, it's right there on your screen, was licensed based on a clinical trial in which the control was literally another investigational product. It was, as you can see on your screen, an investigational meningococcal group C conjugate vaccine, not a placebo. I don't think they would have ever done that for a drug. Anybody, by the way, you can just go to Google, just type in FDA licensed vaccines, go to the FDA website, and you can go and look at all of this information right there. Last I checked, FDA is not an anti-vaxxer organization, so I think the information is reliable on their website. You can go take a look at everything I've just showed you. COVID-19 vaccine trials, by comparison, I know folks have taken lots of issues with the COVID-19 vaccine clinical trials, but I'm telling you, if you look at the clinical trial for all childhood vaccines, and you're going to make a decision on what vaccine to take based on this clinical trial, on how many people were in it. COVID-19 vaccines had 30 or 42,000, depending on whether it was Moderna or Pfizer. How long it reviewed safety, they did it for 6 months, and whether it had a placebo control. Though Moderna and Pfizer COVID-19 vaccines had a placebo control for, on average, 2 months. You should take a COVID vaccine every day of the week over any other childhood vaccine. So when people look at the COVID-19 vaccine and they, or take issue with the clinical trial, understand that from the perspective of the FDA and the perspective of pharmaceutical companies, they went way above and beyond. I know folks talk about how they were rushed, but that just, I'm not really sure I'm not sure exactly what that means, because every vaccine took decades to develop technology. I mean, starting from when they invented the wheel way back when, right? Even mRNA technology took decades until they figured out how do we get it in, how do we deliver it? They came up with a little banana particle. How do we get the mRNA to stay integrated? They would create one of the. Anyways, there's a whole process to it, and they were in the process of developing a COVID vaccine for the SARS-CoV-1 over at NIAID, and they just slotted this right in. They were pretty much there. The question is not how long it takes to develop the technology. The question is, how robust is the study, the clinical trial done in human beings to assess its safety. And it was deficient for COVID-19 vaccines, no doubt. But that's just because that's the way the industry works when it comes to vaccines in general, again, because of the lack of liability under the 1986 Act. Okay. So you might be saying, fine, maybe the clinical trials weren't good enough, but surely our federal health authorities are properly reviewing safety after licensure, right? For sure. After licensure, they review safety. And every time they tell you, when somebody complains of an issue from a vaccine, they say, rest assured, they don't cause it, because we've studied it extensively. There are over 100 serious adverse events listed in the package inserts in Section 6.2 of childhood vaccines and other vaccines. And I can tell you our firm, as I mentioned earlier, we've got 10 folks who handle vaccine injury claims. We do not sue pharmaceutical companies. Under the 1986 Act, we can bring a claim, but it's against the Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services. We sue in something called the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program. It's part of the Federal Court of Claims in Washington, D.C., and the federal government is represented by the Department of Justice in those cases. We have no right to discovery. We can't take depositions. We can't get documents. We don't get an Article III judge. We get a special master. It's a highly constrained program and system. They paid out over $4 billion for damages with a cap of $250 on pain and suffering, $250 for death. It is not your typical tort process. Let's put it that way, okay? And it's supposed to be set up to make it easier to get compensation. I'll tell you it is not. Anyways, so we get calls all the time from folks with various injuries from vaccines. We don't bring any cases for COVID vaccines. They also have PrEP Act immunity, which is another level. We can't even go to VICP for that. But for other vaccines, I could tell you that what we do is when we get a call, my child had X issue after X vaccine. We start with the clinical studies. Well, we don't do that anymore because they're pointless. So then we go to the post-marketing literature, and I can tell you it's pretty much vacuous for most vaccines. Again, if you're going to take a vaccine based on the studies that are done after licensure, you should take a COVID vaccine every day of the week. Let's use the injury that public health authorities have said they have most thoroughly, completely studied and assure you that vaccines don't cause that injury. The claim that vaccines don't cause autism, right? That's the claim that they tell you 100% they have studied it. So if they really haven't studied it properly, that will probably be a good reflection of the science, the state of the science, I would imagine, for the other 100 serious issues that people complain about from vaccines. Let's take a look at the autism one as the example, okay? I'm going to play here's a quick video.
We're not sure as a scientific community what causes autism, but we know that vaccines do not.
Vaccines are really the one thing we have looked at as causing autism.
Yeah, I agree with you. We know that vaccines don't cause autism. The science is clear.
Vaccines don't cause autism.
I do not deny in any way that we need to do more about autism, but it has nothing to do with vaccines.
Let me be clear. Vaccines do not cause autism.
Vaccines don't cause autism.
Absolutely sure.
Absolutely sure.
Okay, so categorical, does not cause autism. Great. Despite the fact that health authorities tell parents with autistic children vaccines don't cause autism, studies surveying these families still show that 40 to 70% still blame vaccines as a cause of their child's autism. And when you ask them what vaccines they blame, the ones that are highlighted in red are the ones that they will list. And you can read those in those studies. I believe I had links to them in the last slide. No, I don't, but you can see the titles there. So when you look at this list, you could see hepatitis B, DTaP, Hib, PCV13, and IPV, all given in the first 6 months of life. And then at the very bottom there, you see the MMR vaccine, where the health authorities have focused all their efforts. That's given at 1 year of age. And so you would say, okay, that means they have studied all these vaccines to make sure they don't cause autism, right? If they're claiming vaccines don't cause autism, let's see if they've done that. And just to be clear, the claim that vaccines cause autism and the fact that their parents were claiming that all these vaccines can cause it is nothing new, and it certainly predates the claim that MMR vaccine causes autism. which started in the late 1990s with Andrew Wakefield. Folks, I believe, know about that, and that was in the late 90s. Well, this is the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act of 1986, and in one of its sections, it identified the 11 most commonly claimed injuries from pertussis vaccine, given at 2, 4, and 6 months, all the way back in the early 80s. And you can see that in that law, it said the Secretary of HHS shall complete a review of all relevant medical and scientific information on the nature, circumstances, and extent of the relationship, if any, between vaccines containing pertussis and the following illnesses and conditions, including autism. Okay, great. So, but here's the thing. When they commissioned the Institute of Medicine in 1991, they published the study that reviewed it. They found 0 studies, none. No studies that showed it doesn't cause autism, no studies showing it does cause autism, none. Right? Okay, so that's 1991. I'm not going to play this video because I don't want to run out of time, but this is the former head of the NIH, Dr. Healy, in 2008 saying, we haven't studied this question of vaccines and autism, really. And she goes, I think the reason is they're afraid if they find an issue, people are going to be scared and not vaccinated, or so they don't want to, they're not studying it. Here is, again, the CDC, federal health authorities, another agency called HRSA, pay the Institute of Medicine again to review the 100 and something most commonly claimed injuries from vaccines. And on that list, again, was pertussis-containing vaccines as well as diphtheria and tetanus, and whether or not it causes autism, okay? And here's their report from 2012. Their conclusion is the evidence is inadequate to accept or reject a causal relationship between diphtheria toxoid, tetanus toxoid, and acellular pertussis-containing vaccines and autism. And when you read that full page, that's the entire thing. And this was a giant panel of every specialist. Institute of Medicine got tons of our money, taxpayer money, to do this study. They couldn't find any. They found one study. They could find one study on pertussis-containing tetanus, diphtheria, vaccines, and autism. It was done by the Geyer and Geyer, and it actually found a correlation between autism and DTaP vaccine, given at 2, 4, and 6 months of age. But the IOM threw the study out. You know why? They said it's unreliable. They said, quote, it was from a passive surveillance system and lacked an unvaccinated comparison population. It was based on VAERS data. Everybody familiar with VAERS? So they threw the one study they did find out, and they said there's no study. So here we are. 1991, there was nothing done. 2012, there was nothing done. I actually also asked Dr. Plotkin, who is the world's leading vaccinologist, about exactly this study and the question of whether or not you can claim vaccines don't cause autism if you don't know whether pertussis-containing vaccines do not cause autism because you've never done the science on it.
This is an excerpt from the IOM's report, right?
Yes.
Okay. Can you read the causality conclusion with regard to whether DTaP and Tdap cause autism?
The evidence is inadequate to accept or reject a causal relationship between diphtheria toxoid, tetanus toxoid, or acellular pertussis-containing vaccine and autism.
If you don't know whether DTaP or Tdap cause autism, shouldn't you wait until you do know, until you have the science to support it, to then say that vaccines do not cause autism?
Do I wait? No, I do not wait, because I have to take into account the health of the child.
And so for that reason, you're okay with telling the parent that DTaP, Tdap does not cause autism, even though the science isn't there yet to support that claim?
Absolutely.
That's 2018. So then on behalf of our client, we said, all right, maybe the world's leading vaccinologist doesn't have the proof. And you hear what he's saying. He's saying, look, I'm okay with saying it doesn't cause autism, even though I don't have a shred of evidence that pertussis-containing vaccine doesn't cause autism. So we FOIA'd the CDC, all right, the mechanism Congress gave us to check on those whose salaries we pay over at the federal government. For all studies relied upon by the CDC to claim that DTaP vaccines do not cause autism. We gave them another chance, right? Come on. Give us the studies. Here you go. Here, give us another chance. Also give it to us, please, for NGRX-B, that's the Hep B vaccine, for Prevnar 13, for HIV, for IPV, as well as for whether the cumulative number of these vaccines do not cause autism. So we FOIA'd for this. The CDC stonewalled us, so we eventually sued them in federal court. And eventually we entered into this final order entered by a federal judge. You can see it right there, signed by the Department of Justice on behalf of the CDC. I signed it on behalf of ICANN, and it was entered as an order of the court. And in this order, the CDC finally lists 20 studies that they say they rely upon to claim vaccines don't cause autism. Before this thing was signed by the Department of Justice and a draft was sent to me, I remember I spoke to the DOJ attorney. I said, hey, you just sent me a list of 20 studies that you want to put in a stipulated order. I read them. None of them involve the vaccines I'm asking you about. You really, the CDC wants to enter a stipulated order that's going to have a list of 20 studies, not one of which show a single study that any of the vaccines given in the first 6 months of life do not cause autism, except for one, by the way. You know, they listed one of them was that 2012 IOM report I showed you about DTaP. That's the only one, meaning the only thing they cited in this list of 20 studies was a 2012 IOM report that looked for studies of whether pertussis vaccine caused autism, could only find one, and it had a correlation, and they threw it out. That's it. Well, you can see on the screen you signed it. 18 of those studies involved thimerosal, not an ingredient in any of those vaccines, or MMR. One involved antigen, and that study itself says you can't conclude whether it does or doesn't cause vaccines don't cause autism, because it didn't study that, studied antigen. And one involved MMR, thimerosal, and DTaP. That's the 2012 IOM report. Well, I'll show you one last video on this to just maybe drive home this point, okay? Because maybe the CDC can't find it. Maybe the Institute of Medicine can't find it. Maybe Dr. Plotkin. There was a lawsuit that specifically involved vaccines and autism, and Dr. Catherine Edwards, you see she's the third author of the standard medical textbook on vaccines. So she's one of the second, third leading vaccinologists in the world, probably. So she appeared as an expert in that case on vaccines and autism. So there's no there's no gotchas, lawyers. She came into that as an expert witness on vaccines and autism in a case where a child got a whole bevy of vaccines. So let's see what she had to say about the question of has the claim that vaccines do not cause autism, has that been properly studied? Again, this is just the example. I'm not saying vaccines cause autism. I'm trying to establish, are our public health authorities doing the science they need to be able to say, yes, this doesn't cause myocarditis. Yes, this doesn't cause radiculopathy. It doesn't, transverse myelitis. See, are they doing the work? I'm just using this as an example. Let's see what she has to say when asked about vaccines and autism.
According to your profile, you have done most of the pivotal trials relied upon to license many of the vaccines, correct, on the market?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So you're highly experienced at conducting clinical trials, correct?
I'm highly experienced conducting clinical trials.
Okay. And you're familiar with many of the clinical trials that relied upon to license many of the vaccines currently on the market, correct?
I am.
Okay. In your opinion, did the clinical trials relied upon to license the vaccines that Yates received, many of which are still on the market today, were they designed to rule out that the vaccine causes autism?
No. You've badgered me into answering the question the way you want me to, but I think that that's probably the answer.
Is that your accurate and truthful testimony?
Yes.
In the expert disclosures for this case, it asserts that, among other things, you will testify that, quote, the issue of whether vaccines cause autism has been thoroughly researched and rejected, end quote. It's your testimony that MMR vaccine cannot cause autism.
That's correct.
It's your testimony that Hep B vaccine cannot cause autism.
That's correct.
It's your testimony that IPOL cannot cause autism.
Yes.
It's your testimony that HIV vaccine cannot cause autism.
Yes.
It's your testimony that varicella vaccine cannot cause autism.
Yes.
It's your testimony that Prevnar vaccine cannot cause autism.
Yes.
And it's your testimony that DTaP vaccine cannot cause autism.
Yes.
And do you have a study that supports that DTaP doesn't cause autism?
I do not have a study that DTaP causes autism, so I don't have either.
Do you have any study one way or another of whether IPOL causes autism?
No, I do not, sir.
Do you have any study one way or another of whether NDREX-B causes autism?
I do not have any evidence that it causes autism, nor that it does not.
And what about HB titers vaccine? Any evidence one way or another of whether it causes autism?
No.
And what about Prevnar vaccine? Any evidence one way or another?
No, sir. No, sir.
And how about varicella vaccine? Let me just finish. Are there any studies one way or another that support whether it does or doesn't cause autism?
Part of MMR, but not as varicella by itself. No, sir. No studies that say it does, or no studies that say it doesn't.
Right. There have been studies that have found an association between hepatitis B vaccine and autism, correct?
Not studies that I feel are credible.
Okay, which study are you referring to when you say that?
Well, why don't you show me the study, and then I'll see whether I agree with it.
I know there's a popular conception about vaccine safety, and then there's a reality to that. There's what the PR machine says, and then there's what you learn when people are under oath and have to actually answer. And you just heard from the two world-leading vaccinologists, and you saw what the CDC was able to produce when compelled in federal court. On the issue, they say, on the claimed vaccine injury, they claim they have studied more thoroughly than any other vaccine injury claim in history. Just to put it into perspective, these are all the vaccines in the childhood schedule. The ones in yellow are the ones they've actually studied for autism. And these are just some of the ingredients. This is the one ingredient they've actually studied. It would be easy to actually study it. You just compare retrospectively. They have databases of insurance data, the vaccine safety data link with thousands, tens of thousands of completely unvaccinated kids in it. It would be, in a few clicks, you could easily study this question properly by comparing with existing data, retrospectively, unvaccinated kids with vaccinated kids, but they won't do it. We've asked many times. Including, and I'm going to skip forward. This is a family with triplets whose kids, all three of them.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cash.
I want to try to summarize a lot of what you've said, and you just tell me if I'm getting this correct. The health authorities that you presented here categorically state that vaccines do not cause autism. And yet, when they're questioned under oath, they say clearly that there's no evidence one way or the other from the studies to indicate whether vaccines contribute to autism.
One qualifier on that. They don't say that there's no evidence from the studies. They're saying there are no studies. They haven't done them. Meaning I'm not standing here telling you vaccines cause autism. I am telling you they cannot claim they do not. You know, you want to make a claim, you need data. At least a peer-reviewed study. They don't have that. Last I checked, that's how science is done.
So the summary is there are no studies showing evidence one way or the other, except for one that they discount. Is that?
Well, the reality is there are actually a number of studies that do show correlation between autism and vaccines, including the hepatitis B study that I referenced there at the end that showed babies that got a Hep B versus those that didn't have 3-time risk of autism. There's the DTaP study from Geyer and Geyer. There's a number of other. There's the Mawson study that actually did a homeschool survey of parents who were vaccinated versus unvaccinated that did show 4 times risk of autism amongst the vaccinated versus the unvaccinated kids. But I'm not here to litigate autism. I was just trying to use it as an example of whether they've properly studied safety concerns as a reflection of COVID injuries. You know, we have at our one group alone, React 19, and there is over 30,000 individuals seriously injured by COVID-19 vaccine. It's run by folks who, Brand Dressen, who's a former, was in the AstraZeneca clinical trial, and by Joe Woskog, who's a former orthopedic surgeon who, after the Moderna vaccine, can no longer operate because of what it's caused to his nervous system. And, you know, they're banded together to try to help folks. You know, the federal government, if these 30,000 seriously injured individuals in this one group are going to get proper help, they need recognition that their injuries are from the vaccine, because until that happens, treatments are not actually catered to the etiology of the disease. Insurance companies won't cover the treatments. Funding from NIH doesn't flow to find those types of treatments. It's critical that they recognize where the injuries come from if they're not. I'll give you an example of actually about that right now. I'll show you. I'll show you, in fact, the degree to which they will not recognize injuries. I'll give you, you know, in our firm, we you know, we have a whole intake process, and we've got an incredible number of folks who have come with COVID-19 vaccine injuries. And just understand, people are like, oh, well, those are folks who have issues with vaccines who call you about COVID, you know, vaccine injuries. No, they're not. Folks who call us about vaccine injuries don't have issues. People who have issues with vaccines don't call us for vaccine injuries because they don't take vaccines. People who call us for vaccine injuries are people who take vaccines. So these folks who took COVID vaccines, they didn't have an issue. That's why they took it. It's always funny to me when they call folks who claim vaccine injuries anti-vaxxers because they got the vaccine anyway. I bring up autism as a reflection of how science is not really properly done when it comes to claimed injuries from vaccines. With the COVID vaccine, they actually have done studies to a degree that is unprecedented from our vantage point, and as somebody who works in the area of vaccines and the law and has to use science. I'm not an MD. I don't have a PhD. I don't get to just say things about vaccines in court or otherwise. I have to prove them, and so we have to look at the evidence. I can't draw on credentials, and that's what we have to do. So when you look at, let me actually, I think, maybe also address your point in the following way. Federal law provides that the package inserts in Section 6.2 should include, quote, only, and I have the CFR provision right there, those adverse events for which there is some basis to believe there's a causal, not correlation, causal relationship between the drug and the occurrence of the adverse event. So those injuries that you see listed, that we read before, Senator, from the hepatitis B package insert, that is the standard deployed to list the injuries, okay? Here is the Section 6.2 of the Moderna vaccine. Just take a look at this list. It's got 3 things on it. It's got myocarditis and pericarditis, which will count as one, right? Inflammation of the heart or the heart lining. It's got anaphylaxis, an immediate allergic reaction, or syncope, it's fainting. That's what it lists. That is all the pharma companies. So I hope that reflects to you the high bar, before they actually put something here. You know, I mean, you know, at our firm alone, for example, we have reports of individuals who feel like their skin's always on fire after COVID vaccine. Never had these reports from any other vaccine. So it appears there's an immunological reaction that's causing the nerve endings, which is not uncommon. I mean, look at Guillain-Barré syndrome, transverse myelitis, the accepted vaccine injuries, they're neurological. There's a very direct correlation. There's a deep connection between immune system and your nervous system. In any event, we have now a number of individuals who called our firm, one firm, with reports of this type of issue. There's no way that's random. A bunch of people didn't just come up with the fact that their entire body feels like it's burning all the time after a COVID vaccine and called our firm. But it's not here. And there are numerous other clearly distinct, unique injuries from COVID vaccines that are not on this list either. This is, by the way, the hepatitis B that we went through earlier. Look at this list. And this shot is given to a 1-day-old baby, 2 and 6 months old. And I think that over time, the COVID vaccine might have more as well. Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
I have a question as well for just a moment.
Yes, sir.
I'm interested in solving problems. If there's an unethical position that physicians take that says that they can't go back and study it because the clinician studies had already been done or whatever, seems to me that is that a federal rule among physicians, or are these folks that are doing this type of work?
So before a clinical study or a study will be done, there's something called Institutional Review Board approval, IRB approval, that every scientist will get. No scientists, including all the doctors in this room, if they go out and they do a study without IRB approval, they will be in big trouble. They can lose their license. They can go after them. I'm not aware of any IRB board that would approve a study of a vaccine using a placebo control where there's an already licensed product. But here's the problem with that, Senator. The problem is this. They never studied the first vaccine for every given disease in a placebo control. So, chickenpox vaccine, first one ever, right? So why not use a placebo control? They didn't. They gave a very small group of people a shot of neomycin, an antibiotic. Why would you do that? Or Prevnar 13, the very first vaccine, Prevnar 7, was licensed in a trial against another investigational vaccine, which is, again, something I couldn't make up if I was trying to make stuff up about vaccines. If you go across the board and you look at each one, I don't make the rules. I just know that that's what they are. I agree with you. They should be done.
So in South Carolina, for instance, if our sovereign state of South Carolina decided we wanted to look into it and have our own studies done, you're telling me that the federal government says we can't do that?
It's not that the federal government says it can't do it, but the scientists who participate in it might suffer consequences professionally from the boards that give them their licensure and so forth. I'm sure that some of the folks in this room who are medical professionals can speak to that directly.
I'd like them to do that, because it seems to me that what you've articulated, and by the way, thank you for being an attorney who takes care of the people and trying to take care of this problem. Thank you for lawyers just like you who go out and study these issues and make sure that we know what it is that we should know. So thank you for being here. But I'm also looking for the solutions, and it seems to me, to recap, your solution is to do it right the first time and have clinical studies that really show the adverse effects. And then if we have those adverse effects, either, there's a percentage of people that might be affected, and it may be the only way you can do it. I understand that. Well, it seems these doctors are saying that, well, it's okay if we lose 10%, okay? We save 90. So again, I mean, I understand the idea there.
Yeah.
But I'd like for the parent to know, especially in the children's situation, that there's a 10% chance your child's going to develop autism or whatever else it might be.
Well, something on the order of 2% of children get 0 vaccines in America, and according to CDC studies, they're very, they study these populations of people. They're actually folks who are often PhDs. The more higher degrees and the more scientifically literate, the less likely they are to vaccinate their children. I'm saying 0 vaccines, not, they don't have access to medical care. I'm talking choosing not to. And so you have this existing population already. And so, for example, in the state of South Carolina, if you have any captive payer healthcare systems here, I don't know if you have a system in which not only does is the health insurance provided, but also the medical care. Within those captive payer environments, the data probably already exists to do the comparison. So you don't even need to go and reinvent the wheel. We've been trying to get access to that data. Obviously, if the state of South Carolina wants to force its release, it would be an incredible opportunity to do science. Let the data show what it shows, but let's just if you could, and it could be de-identified and released. We've tried every way. It's hard to sue your way into de-identified data. I've tried.
Chairman, it may be something that you could look into to help us get the data that he's talking about specifically. I think as an oversight responsibility of the Senate, I think we should be able to see those data. And if their scientists don't want to do it, then the Senate can hire scientists to look at this data. I think our people deserve it and should know that.
I do too, Senator. And when he mentioned that they may fall under, if they were South Carolinian residents, they may fall under some perplexity of a board or something. But I will tell you this, that the regulatory authority in South Carolina will do exactly what the General Assembly tells them to do.
I'm very happy happy to provide a list of suggestions after the hearing. I've got them.
Okay.
So,
Please turn them in.
okay, I'm very happy to. Would you like me to continue? Okay. So just to wrap up the post-licensure safety, well, folks say, yeah, but the way that we can tell that the vaccines are making things better is that, we've got a healthier population. In 1986, there were 11 total doses of vaccines, and of DTP, MMR, and OPV, those three types of vaccines. So you got, a few doses of DTP and so forth. The chronic illness rate, and we have citations right there to the CDC data, was 12.8%. 12.8% of kids had a chronic health issue in the early 1980s. And we are now at 53 in 2017 doses. It's actually at 70. And according to the 2011 study, about 50-something percent. If you back out certain chronic health issues that may not be related to, that probably don't have an immune or a neurological or immune-mediated neurological basis to them, then you're maybe at something 40-something percent of kids have a chronic health issue, not 54. And obviously, the explosion in these chronic health issues are often, they're immune issues, they're immune-mediated issues, and obviously at least the place we should start looking at is the product given over and over again to children to modify their immune system. I'm not saying that vaccines cause all these issues. I'm not saying that. I'm saying it should be studied. And finally, pharmaceutical companies have billions of dollars every year, and like a good company does to promote their product, again, like car companies, like they use their money, deploy them in medical journals, associations, schools, public relations firms, news advertising, lobbyists, so forth, to promote their products. Okay, so you might be saying to yourself, fine, all right, but why? I get why the pharma companies do it, but why would the federal regulators do this? Right? Why would they let a Hep B vaccine be licensed on 5 days of observation? It's hard to wrap your head around it, honestly. I mean, if it wasn't there in black and white, again, I wouldn't believe it if you told me. I had to FOIA for it, sue over it before I actually was like, all right, that's what it is. I'll run through this very quick because I think I'm getting close to the end of my hour. When Congress removed the market forces, I think it recognized that, and what it did instead is it made HHS responsible for vaccine safety. It literally transferred the responsibility of vaccine safety from pharma to the Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services. That's the Department of Federal Government in which the CDC, NIH, FDA is located, and it's all and that responsibility was is in something called the Mandate for Safer Childhood Vaccines. This is part of the 1986 Act, Section 27. If anybody wants to read it, 42 U.S.C. 300 AA 1 through 34 is the entire act. It's pretty short. Any lawyers want to read it should read it. Anyways, the Mandate for Safer Childhood Vaccines is basically what underpins safety of vaccines in our entire country. It's got three little sections in it. Section A says make them safer in every possible way, if you read the list. Section B says form a task force to make recommendations to the Secretary on how to make them safer, comprised of the head of the CDC, FDA, and NIH. And Section 3 says Secretary of HHS, submit a biannual report to Congress on how you made them safer every 2 preceding years. Well, we said, let's start with the easy stuff. On behalf of my client, ICANN, back in 2016 when I started doing this work in earnest, we FOIA'd for the task force recommendations. We actually go to federal court again. We always have to go to federal court, apparently, every time we want something. And there's only been one recommendation ever, one report, back in the 90s, and they disbanded the task force. So that's not been done. In terms of the biannual report for Section C, 0. Never been done. We actually sued them in federal court. They finally agreed 5 years ago. They've never done the report. We actually recently went back and said, okay, like just a few months ago, it's been 5 years when you committed, you've never done these biannual reports. Have you now done them? They still have never done them. If they're not doing the easy part of the Mandate for Safer Childhood Vaccines, of just making recommendations and reports, you think they're doing the hard part? Here's the copies of the stipulated orders on all of those. Here's a report from Congress in the year 2000. And it was looking at conflicts in the vaccine approval and recommendation process. They looked at the CDC and FDA's committees. It's ACIP at the CDC side. It's VRBAC on the FDA side. And here's what the House report found. Quote, the overwhelming majority of members, both voting members and consultants, have substantial ties to the pharmaceutical industry. And by the year 2000, a lot of the vaccines in the childhood schedule were already there. You think that they'd clean up their act. They didn't. 2009, the Inspector General again looked at it, found the same issues. And since we're here about COVID vaccines, the problem still persists. Dr. Edwards actually was one of the only 5 members of the Independent Data Safety Monitoring Board for the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine. And I had an opportunity to ask her about that on the stand. I'll play that for you briefly.
Isn't it true that you've also been an advisor to Pfizer?
Yes, sir. I have been an advisor to Pfizer.
Is there a way to raise the volume?
Working very, very.
And isn't it true that you've also been an advisor to Pfizer?
Oh, all right. A little louder, if that's possible.
And isn't it true that you've also been an advisor to Pfizer?
Yes, sir. I have been an advisor to Pfizer, and I've been working very, very closely with Pfizer, particularly their COVID vaccines, and going over lots of reactions and adverse events. So yes, I am working and being paid by Pfizer for my assessment of vaccine safety.
You're part of the Data Safety Monitoring Board for the
That's
Pfizer
correct.
COVID vaccine. Is that what you meant when you just
That
said
is
that?
correct.
You're one of the only 5 members of that Data Safety Monitoring Board over the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine, right?
Yes, sir, I am.
And that's supposed to be an independent Data Safety Monitoring Board, correct?
It is an independent data safety and monitoring board.
That's the board that all of us in America are hoping on and relying upon is going to independently make sure that safety is properly assessed as the clinical trial for that Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine is ongoing, correct?
That's true, and let me tell you that we have worked very hard to go over this and very, very hard to do that indeed as comprehensively as we possibly can.
And since it's supposed to be independent, it's critical that the members of that independent Data Safety Monitoring Board are in fact independent of the pharmaceutical company whose product is being evaluated, correct?
That's correct.
But isn't it true that directly before becoming a member of the Independent Data Safety Monitoring Board of the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine, you were an advisor to Pfizer?
Pfizer pays me to evaluate the safety of their vaccines because I'm an expert. So I do get paid to do the work that I've been doing, but I've been doing the work conscientiously and comprehensively.
My question was, before you became a member of the Independent Data Safety Monitoring Board for the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine, isn't it true that you were separately, before you held that independent position, you were an advisor to Pfizer?
Yes, sir, but I think what you're presuming is that because I've been an advisor makes me on their dole or makes me going to say what they want me to say. That is not and has never been a part of my being. I say what I believe based on my expertise.
So you don't think that financial incentives can sway people's judgment at all?
It does not sway my judgment, sir.
Why bother having an independent data safety monitoring board? Why doesn't Pfizer just have some of its employees on it?
Because we are independent.
Meaning folks who were never advisors to Pfizer.
We are independent from Pfizer in this assessment.
So, I'm sure she believes it, that she can be impartial. I assume she believes it. And that's part of the problem, though, is that the process is not independently done. Pharma companies have incredible influence. There's also a revolving door, as you can see. So, here's a quick example from the FDA's website to bring this a bit back to COVID-19 vaccines. This is the homepage of the FDA website. To me, this looks like an advertisement for the COVID-19 bivalent vaccine booster. As far as I'm aware, FDA is supposed to be deciding whether it's safe and effective. They're regulators. That vaccine is not even licensed. So they're promoting a product on their website, in my opinion. I see it as an ad, that they haven't even licensed yet. They haven't even assessed whether to decide whether it's safe and effective. Here's Dr. Peter Marks, the head of the vaccine division, head of the biologics division at the FDA, sits right below the head of the FDA. He's the guy who's really deciding, by the way, whether COVID-19 vaccines are licensed or not. He was making videos promoting the bivalent booster before it was licensed, telling everybody to get it. Do you think after telling millions of Americans to inject this into themselves and their children, when he's actually sitting in his office and now deciding whether or not it's safe and effective license, he's got to go, okay, safe and effective, or do I tell the public, oops, when I told them all to get it? It creates a conflict. I'll just leave it at that. And obviously, if the FDA was, interested in transparency, we wouldn't have to sue them to release the documents they spent 108 days reviewing to license the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine, which they wanted to wait at least 75 years to release to the public. Why is HHS abandoned safety? They're responsible for promoting vaccines statutorily, and they take that obligation very seriously. They're responsible for defending vaccines against claims of harm. We talked about vaccine court, and there's a revolving door between them and industry. Remember that mandate for safer childhood vaccines? You guys make laws, so you'll appreciate this. When you look at the FDA's regulations for drugs, safe and effective, probably fill this room. You know how many regulations FDA has passed on that section of law on making vaccines safer, the mandate for safer child vaccines? 0. There's no regs. There's no CFR provision. There's only that USC provision. It just sits there all alone. It's crying for some attention. Hopefully one day somebody will give it some. Okay. So guaranteed market plus no liability plus conflicted regulators. You go from this in 1986. This is the current vaccine schedule, childhood vaccine schedule. There's also an adult schedule. I left that off this. And just I interlaced them here so you can get a look at it. Okay, that brings us to COVID-19 vaccines. I'll do this super quick because I'm pretty much out of time. So not only is there 86 Act immunity applied to the COVID-19 vaccine, so does the PrEP Act immunity. I believe everybody here is familiar with that already, but I'm happy to talk more about that if anybody would like. Our federal government, by the way, we've got copies of the contracts that the federal government signed to get the Pfizer and Moderna COVID-19 vaccines. They were signed well before the vaccines were developed, and that's a contractual provision. They guaranteed Moderna and Pfizer PrEP Act immunity. Pfizer and Moderna knew with 100% certainty before they ever made a single COVID-19 vaccine that they would never be held liable for any injuries. It's right there on your screen. You can see the link. I compile them all in that link below, and you can read the contracts yourself. That same provision is in all of them. What are the consequences? We went through some of that already. Looking at that, this is a young lady named Maddie Gary. She's one of only 1,131 children that participated in the Pfizer vaccine trial for 12 to 15-year-olds. That's her in a TikTok video before she got the vaccine, and she's now in a wheelchair and has a feeding tube. The fact that the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine caused a serious injury is, drugs do that. It happens. The problem is what Pfizer told the FDA when it submitted the clinical trial data to it about what actually happened to her. Pfizer reported to the FDA, and I'm happy to submit all of this, by the way, in a packet to all of you. Pfizer told the FDA that it was a functional abdominal pain, that she had a bellyache. We sent Dr. Peter Marks, who's doing the wait a minute videos. Okay, we sent him all her medical records, everything, straight into the ER right after the first shot, documents, Pfizer, the vaccine. She's, ER hospitalizations. Like I said, our firm does COVID-19 vaccine injuries. This is very clearly, there's no differential diagnosis. There's nothing else that would explain it. She was totally healthy. She got the shot. Her neurological issues are consistent with what other vaccines actually can cause sometimes, which, like I said, transverse myelitis type of events, CIDPs type of stuff. And so, but that's not what the Pfizer told the FDA, because Pfizer doesn't do the trials, obviously. FDA doesn't do the trial. Pfizer does. Pfizer just submits the data to the FDA. So when we finally submitted that information to the FDA, we have now we FOIA'd for all of the internal communications at the FDA to see what did they do with what we sent them. We had to go to federal court in Ohio, Southern Ohio, and we now have the internal documents in which Dr. Peter Marks emails Pfizer and there's communications, and Dan Woodcock, who was then the head of the FDA, says to Dr. Marks, "What's with this young lady?" And so, if I'm Dr. Marks, my reaction should be, Pfizer, what the heck? You told us functional abdominal pain. Instead, he says to his minions, go ask Pfizer what's going on. So they do send back this long, detailed report about her. Finally, right? So now they have it. And in the report, I remember the first time I read it, I go, oh, they're admitting she was injured by the vaccine. But then at the very end, you get to the Pfizer paid investigator at the trial site, and he says he does not feel, that's literally the word, feel, I'll provide this all to you, feel that it was caused by the vaccine. And Dr. Mark sends it back to Janet Woodcock, the head of the FDA, and says, see, we're good. That was it. That was the entire, essentially, exchange as far as we can see from all the internal emails. That is how they treated a serious adverse event in the COVID-19 vaccine clinical trial. I mean, it should have been outrage. Somebody, should have gotten in real trouble for this. At the least, you should have reviewed all of it. Obviously, this just happens to be one person that came to us. I don't know how many other people are like this in the trial. I just happen to know this one anecdotal, this one issue. And again, so the real issue is not that she got hurt, is a tragedy. But drug products can hurt people. It happens. It's the fact that there was a misreporting to the FDA and that the FDA didn't care. They were effectively misled. I'll put it that way. The other part is that the whole point of a clinical trial is to do statistical comparison. You don't know how the product reacts in the body. So, right, you have a group that gets it, a group that doesn't. You statistically compare. You don't inject personal opinion. You don't inject the bias of the pharma company doing the trial. Well, this is the FDA's actual report. You could see the link right down there. Anybody here can open it themselves. And this is a quote from it. You could see 21 people died in the Comirnaty, meaning the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine group, and 17 died in the placebo group. Wait a second. I thought the idea of this vaccine was supposed to reduce deaths, right? Isn't that the whole, so you have more deaths than those who got it versus the placebo group. That should be a problem. But instead, what they did was Pfizer went through every single death and explained the way. By the way, there were twice as many deaths from cardiac issues in the vaccinated group than the placebo group. They don't really discuss that. But they go through every single death, and they explain them away. And FDA accepts that, right? But, for example, when they did the efficacy analysis, does it reduce symptoms, that they accepted a statistical comparison, even though there were hundreds of people in the Pfizer trial who were never tested who had symptoms. In any event, the point is this: when the data didn't show what they wanted on the deaths, they let them do a individual assessment, inject their opinion. They didn't do what they're supposed to do, which is just a straight statistical comparison. In fact, we sent a letter to the FDA and we said, hey, quote, why are the death data from the randomized control trial treated like a clinical case series rather than an RCT when it comes to assessing causality? Right? We said that to them. Well, why are you doing this? You should be doing statistical comparisons. So they wrote back, here's the FDA's response. We're unable to respond substantively at this time due to resource constraints and the ongoing pandemic response. It's literally what the FDA told us. On the most critical question, why are you... Anyway, yeah, it speaks for itself. The CDC did something. They had predetermined how they were going to review VAERS data. They were going to do something called proportional reporting ratio analysis. They published it. Anything over a 2 was supposed to be considered concerning. You could see here the list. We only have this because of FOIA. Again, this had to be clawed out of the CDC. Cerebral thrombosis, all of these issues well above a 2. Because what they do is they look at the historical baseline to the current baseline, and they come up with this ratio. But when the PRR numbers were off the charts, so we asked the CDC, we said, this was your own methodology, predetermined, when truth was original to you. And when it showed these really concerning numbers, aren't you concerned? They said, no. We decided to go with empirical Bayesian analysis conducted by the FDA, and that showed there's no problem. We said, great. Can we have the empirical Bayesian analysis? They said, no. We're in federal court in D.C. right now, suing. We're still waiting to get the empirical Bayesian analysis data. They said, showed there's not an issue. That's the CDC. The other thing the CDC did is something called vSafe. This is what they rolled out in December 2020 with the very first vaccine. VAERS was the premier vaccine safety system, and they decided to roll something new called vSafe. Over 10 million Americans signed up for it. It was designed so that when you came in and got a COVID vaccine, you could sign up for this. Every day it did a check-in for a week, and then for every week for 6 weeks, and then 3 more times after that. The VSafe collected data from these 10 million folks. Most of the folks signed up for VSafe were between December 2020 and the first 2 months after that. These were the people who were enthusiastic, ran out to get the vaccine. These weren't the folks who were mandated, compelled. And it's not like VAERS. VAERS is there when you have an issue, you report. VSafe is just meant as like a social duty. You sign up and you submit information to it, okay? VSafe collected basically 2 types of data, check-the-box data and fill-in-the-blank data. The check-the-box data falls into 2 categories of these 10 million folks. One is for 1 week they collected a list of reactions. All reactions that CDC say is normal, arm pain, stuff like that. So that category was useless. It all was 60, 70, 80% of people reported having them, and the CDC said, that's great. That's reactogenicity. That shows you the vaccine works. What was the point of collecting that data? I have no idea. It's pointless. The second category that maybe, because it's called VSafe, so assuming it's supposed to assess safety, is it collected whether or not people sought hospitalization, whether they needed medical care. That's 1, missed school or work, or 3, couldn't perform normal daily activities. Within the medical, healthcare, they also asked whether you were hospitalized, emergency room, urgent care, or telehealth. Right. Presumably, that is where they were going to assess safety. It's called VSafe, right? And there was a fill-in-the-blank field as well, but that's for another day because we don't have that data yet, or don't have it. They won't give it, and that's going to be. I think there's another organization that's fighting to get it at the moment. With that said. So this was the list, like I told you, of symptom checks, chills, headache. It's too bad they didn't ask about, like, I don't know, how about, like, chest pains for myocarditis, pericarditis, or at least add it later. This is who's currently head of vaccine safety office at CDC said, it's VSafe just not designed to directly monitor specific adverse events outside of reactogenetic AEs. I mean, they even admit it. Here's the thing. In October 2020, this was a presentation provided by the CDC to ACIP. Look at the issues that they list as adverse events of special interest from the COVID-19 vaccine. It includes transverse myelitis, encephalitis, all the issues that actually we're seeing from the COVID-19 vaccine. They're right there on the list. Myocarditis, pericarditis, stroke. It's all right here, well before the vaccine came out. They had an indication that it could cause these serious issues. Did they include that on the list of check-the-box symptoms of VSafe? No. Why? Here is the protocol for VSafe from November of 2020 before it was rolled out. This is from the VSafe actual protocol. Again, every slide has a link at the bottom. You can go see the original document. Okay, it doesn't link to the FDA because we had to get a copy of it. But this is the the CDC document. These are the adverse events of special interest, pre-specified medical conditions. This is in the document designing VSafe, sorry. It includes, again, myocarditis, pericarditis, but again, they were not checked the box. Instead, the medical care. Here's the part where they do health impact I talked about. Here is over 40 studies that the CDC published saying COVID vaccines are safe. And what do they rely upon? They relied upon VAERS data and VSafe data. But they only included 1 week, the first week of people reporting health care after the data from the first week after getting the shot. And that still was like 2%, 1%, still concerning. I don't know why. When we finally got the check-the-box data, what we found was 7.7% reported needing medical care after COVID-19 vaccine, 4.2% in the first 6 weeks after getting the shot. These are folks who, that is an incredible number. They say the whole point of the vaccine is to keep people out of the hospital. 70% of these folks who reported needing medical care were hospitalized, emergency room, or urgent care, and on average 2 to 3 times they went back for that medical care treatment. This is the CDC's own data. This data is from 10 million Americans, so it's far bigger than the clinical trial number, and it's not filtered through the pharma companies. It's probably the best indication you're going to get of what the real adverse event rate from this vaccine is, because it was done on large numbers without filtering. Okay, and you can take a look at this. It shows an increasing, this is just the percent seeking medical care, and this is not cumulative from the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine, 3 years and older, and you can kind of see how there's an increasing number of folks seeking medical care. A last point is that, this part I have to point it out, is that regulators acted surprised that the COVID-19 vaccines don't prevent transmission. But, I found it comical that they did that because most vaccines don't prevent transmission that are required for school. I know the public doesn't know that, but it's the truth. I mean, Here's the FDA doing a study on pertussis vaccine. Here's a consensus paper on pertussis vaccine. Pertussis vaccine cannot avoid infection transmission. Pertussis vaccines do not prevent colonization. They do not reduce circulation of Bordetella pertussis and exert no herd immunity effect. Here's we FOIA'd, we petitioned. I'll just skip over all that. Diphtheria vaccine, same thing. Here's a CDC study saying it doesn't prevent transmission. Tetanus is not communicable from person to person. Polio, the polio vaccine we've been using for over 2 decades in America. I'll just read first what the CDC says on its website. Inactivated poliovirus vaccine protects people against all 3 types of poliovirus. IPV does not contain live virus, cannot cause disease. It protects people from polio disease, but does not stop transmission of the virus. Polio proliferates in the intestinal tract. It's fecal to oral contamination. If you want to prevent transmission, you need immunity in your mucosal surfaces. Okay, IgA antibodies. The vaccine is injected into your. It only gives you IgG antibodies in your bloodstream, what they call systemic immunity. So it doesn't do anything to prevent transmission. I'm not saying this, by the way. The CDC is saying this right there on your screen with a link. You can go to it. And here's the world. And so, even the polio vaccine, it doesn't prevent transmission. This should have been no surprise. The meningococcal vaccine doesn't either. This actually comprises a lot of the vaccines required. This is the majority of the vaccines required for school in South Carolina. So in any event, they could have, by the way, easily tested for whether COVID-19 vaccine prevents transmission with 30,000 people in the clinical trial. They should have just given everybody a COVID test once a week in the trial. But, they didn't have enough. Obviously, millions of Americans were all given free tests, and everybody was asked to test all day long, including to keep their jobs, go to school. But apparently they couldn't find enough tests to just test the folks in the trial once a week. Instead, they only tested you sometimes if you had symptoms. That's it. And that is what they used to determine that 95% number. Remember the 8 versus 100? Even though hundreds more had symptoms, never tested in any event. Thank you very much. I'm happy to take any questions. Oh, wait, I can go through the conclusion quickly if you would like. But basically, I was just going to I'll just add that, mandates, the thing about mandates is you only really need them when there is questions about safety and efficacy. Nobody needs to mandate you to take products such as food or water and so forth. It's when there is a question of the safety and efficacy of the product, really, that it's always been the tool of those in authority to, and they can't persuade you on the merits. They have to bully you, coerce you, so forth, to do something, especially when it's done from a place of somebody else's interest, and those who are dictating, those who are forcing it, don't really fully understand it. I think it's just really important that we, at the end of the day, I don't know if you're going to be able to fix all these issues at the end of the day with, conflicted regulators. Are you going to make clinical trials better? Are you going to get rid of the immunity at the federal government level? Are you going to make post-licensure safety happen? Fixing these problems is incredible. The last stop in that entire train of problems that we've just gone through, in my mind, comes down to individual and civil rights. That at the end of the day, everybody always has to have the right to choose. And that means that they can't have their job, school, everything in their life, civil liberties on the chopping block if they don't conform. Because if there's, for folks out there who love every vaccine and every mask, and great, get every vaccine out there, wear 16 masks, live in your basement forever, because that's freedom, that's America. You should be free to do that. But if the day comes there's a medical product that you don't want, and you refuse it, and you can't get a job, and you can't go to school, and you can't go on a plane, then you don't have any rights. Then you're home alone, and you can practice all your rights by yourself. Thank you.
I thoroughly agree with you, Aaron, and I appreciate it. That's why I was come straight out of the gate with the Senate bill to prevent the mandate. That was an extremely well-presented testimony. Does anybody have any questions for Aaron before we move on? You were pretty thorough, and we appreciate it very much.
I've got about 5 more hours, by the way.
Well, in all honesty, you have presented a similar testimony to other legislators, and I've watched them on YouTube. So this was not my first viewing, but it was good to have you here in person. And the more we hear, the better we appreciate what you do.
Thank you. And if there's any follow-up information, evidence, documents, support that anybody would like, our office is very happy to provide it. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Aaron, so much.